court challenges on that front, but otherwise there are sweeping powers for the government here.
Governor Inslee was speaking quite starkly this week in Washington, and we just heard from a mayor there about penalties, and he made a broader point. I mean, you're speaking to the fact that there's plenty of authority for a actual bona fide, justified public health emergency, but he spoke about something higher than the law. Take a listen.
How far does this extend to personal events like parties, like weddings, like funerals? And then what are the penalties exactly for not abiding by the ban?
The penalties are you might be killing your granddad if you don't do it. And I'm serious about this.
What do you think about that and the way government officials try to instill seriousness within the law without panic?
That's 100% right, Ari. I mean, yeah, there are penalties for violating all of these different government restrictions, but at the bottom, this shouldn't be about penalties. This is about your own conscience and what you're willing to do and what you're willing to risk. And anyone, we're all in this together, and we all have to do everything we can to avoid the spread of the disease and flatten the curve. The law is a piece of it, but it's the tiniest piece of it. It's all about our individual actions, and so I think the governor got it exactly right. This is why we're also very different than China. China, in addition to the movement restrictions, they're literally tracking everyone's cell phones, WeChat and other things, so they can determine if anyone's moving out of their restricted areas or into the restricted areas. They can go and get them with their military. We don't want to go down that path. And we're a country of liberty and freedom, but we're also a country in which we view ourselves as having a communitarian responsibility to one another. And we shouldn't need the law to do this. We shouldn't need apps to be tracked or anything like that. But if it comes to that, fortunately, the government does have powers to do things like impose movement restrictions.
Neil Katyal, with a lot of context here, thank you so much. I want to remind everyone you can always go to msnbc.com/opening arguments. We'll have this segment there later tonight on coronavirus and the law, as well as Neil's past reporting and analysis. Meanwhile, a lot of Americans finding that this hits home when you hear about people you care about, if not in your community. What about famous people you know about? Tom Hanks and his wife publicly announcing they have coronavirus. They got tested in Australia. Also puts more pressure on why it's so hard to get tested right here in the U.S. We're back on that and much more in 30 seconds.
There's a company that's talked to even more real people than me. J.D. Power, 448,134 to be exact. They answered 410 questions in 8 categories about vehicle quality. And when they were done, Chevy earned more J.D. Power quality awards across cars, trucks, and SUVs than any other brand over the last 4 years. So on behalf of Chevrolet, I want to say thank you, real people.
You're welcome.
We're going to need a bigger room.
We're back with breaking news here, and it's all about responses to the coronavirus. Since we came on the air, Delaware has joined the many states declaring states of emergency, the 20th state to have done so. You can see we're keeping track on several of the ways that you can understand this and keep it in context, as we've been saying throughout the evening. Facts, not panic, but over 1,500 cases and quite the market crash today as well. All of this putting pressure on the federal government and how Donald Trump is leading. Here he was today.
Stay away from people and wash your hands and do all of the things that we're supposed to be doing a little bit anyway, but it'll go very quickly.
I'm joined now by Congressman Ari Melber from California, who is also a doctor. Good evening.
Good evening, Ari.
What is important to know here as we move forward? The president spoke last night, issued a type of travel ban, said some things that had to be corrected. What do you want your constituents and the rest of the viewers to know?
Look, let's take this seriously. The president often undermines our own message of how serious this is. This will get worse before it gets better. That said, the vast majority of folks are going to be fine, but we've got to be vigilant here. We as Congress have to get our act together. There are a lot of vulnerable folks that are one paycheck away from being evicted. There are a lot of vulnerable folks that don't have paid family leave. Let's take politics out of this. Let's address the urgency of now. Let's put those safety net services in there for the uninsured folks so they can go get tested if they're concerned. and let's actually fix this testing problem. You know, it would almost be better if the president didn't get on television right now, because I think he is undermining the urgency of now we can do this, we can get ahead of it, but we've got to all be on the same page.
Well, which is it at this point? Because some of his critics and Democrats have said he's played it down too much. Then as of last night, some were saying he's overreacting with the partial travel ban.
Well, so what we know is a travel ban right now is not going to do a whole lot to mitigate things. It may slow things down a little bit, but coronavirus is now community spreading. It's throughout the United States of America. 6 weeks ago when he did the China travel ban, that probably bought us a little bit of time. Unfortunately, they squandered that time. That's when we should have been developing testing capabilities, getting equipment out to the hospitals and public health centers, et cetera, and that just didn't happen. They've slow played this. That's fine. Listen to Dr. Fauci when he says, this was a mistake. We've squandered things. Now let's get our act together. Let's come together. This isn't political. This isn't partisan. We've got to do our jobs as Democrats and Republicans, reassure the public, but let the doctors and the scientists do what they've got to do.
Why is testing such a problem from a policy perspective?
We're frustrated. The administration cannot answer the question why it is taking us so long to get testing capabilities up and running when South Korea can do 10 to 15,000 tests a day. I would tell the CDC to pick up the phone, call that South Korean company that's creating these tests, ask them if we can get that licensing, and let's start creating those tests here. This is not about ego or anything else. This is about getting the capabilities out to the front lines, the doctors, the nurses, the public health workers that are on the front lines that are going to keep us safe and help us get ahead of this.
Congressman Barrett, thank you so much. We want to dig as well deeper into the testing issues and how to fix them. We have a doctor in Washington State when we come back. Actor Tom Hanks now is quite clearly the most famous American to contract the coronavirus, testing positive while in Australia. As the New York Times notes, though, tests there are widely available and free. A marked contrast to the United States, where test kits have been hard to find. There are not enough for people who need them, a fact that the government's own science leaders admit.
The system is not really geared to what we need right now, what you are asking for. That is a failing.
And a failing, yes.
It is a failing. I mean, let's admit it. The
Okay.
idea of anybody getting it easily, the way people in other countries are doing it, we're not set up for that. Do I think we should be? Yes, but we're not.
You are looking at the process of congressional oversight, where people from the administration have to say under oath what the facts are. They also have private briefings, and lawmakers who received one also speaking out on what they're learning about our capabilities as a country to deal with coronavirus.
I think we are all very concerned about the spread, about the lack of testing. The reality is, and we are told by the experts, that they do not yet have the tests available and can't give us a date that they will be.
We're not the best equipped nation in terms of testing. That's absolutely obvious. I think generally speaking, our public health system and our system of hospitals and experts and doctors is, but we have a serious deficiency in being prepared for testing. South Korea, for example, is doing a better job.
About 11,000 people have been tested thus far in the U.S. South Korea, which you just heard mentioned, tests 10,000 people daily. Experts say several factors lead to this failing. We were just discussing this. We want to bring you some more context. Flaws in the initial test kits sent by the CDC last month that compromised critical early stage efforts. The Trump administration also declining offers of a test developed by the World Health Organization, instead basically, quote, going it alone. Then weeks ago, Trump administration officials blocking efforts by doctors out in Washington State to use their own tests because, and this can be a consideration, of course, but those tests were not at the time FDA approved. One of those Washington State doctors, though, joins me right now, Dr. Alex Greninger, assistant professor at the University of Washington Medical Center in Seattle. Good day to you. Explain explain to us the context here and the balancing of things that in a non-emergency setting might make sense, like waiting versus the situation we're in.
Right. So on February 4th, the FDA offered a EUA for the CDC. That's Emergency Use Authorization for the CDC test. And part of that emergency use authorization and the laws around that basically did not allow hospital labs and clinical labs to begin to perform testing until they also had received emergency use authorization. And the FDA has a clear interest in this, and we do too, for having accurate testing, which is very important. The problem is that created a monoculture, which the CDC test unfortunately had one bad primer set, and it took 3 weeks to fix that issue. And so it wasn't until the last week of February where we were able to both fix the CDC kit, and then on February 29th, the FDA allowed the go-ahead for clinical labs such as ours to begin to perform testing.
So is that how the system's supposed to work, or do you have a criticism embedded in that history?
Well, I think there are a few things that could be fixed, but I also think that any country that has come in contact with this virus has been caught unaware.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a very difficult virus. It transmits very efficiently. It has a high morbidity and mortality. Every country that's come in contact with this virus has not made peace with it. They've decided to fight.
What would making peace involve?
Well, I mean, like with flu, it's not peace really, but it's just like with flu, we we get vaccinated, but we sort of, still go about economic activity, right? The market hasn't dropped 10% for respiratory syncytial virus. But with this particular virus, China, Italy, you can see the response of these countries to this particular virus. It has a high morbidity, high mortality rate.
It seems that you're gesturing towards the psychological.
Be the day when it really came home to people that things are going to be different for a while, and the big unknown is we don't know for how long. But just the list of things that happened today, last night and today that you ran down. I mean, no March Madness, no professional sports leagues. Major League Baseball is putting off opening day and won't have crowds at the spring training games. I mean, it's not just the sports leagues, but those really they get your attention, yeah. Right? And so many people are working from home, as I did today, because at the Washington Post, that's the policy now. If you're able to work from home, please do. There's hand sanitizer everywhere. We're all washing our hands. And I think what we need is, what I wish we had is a better narrator than we have.
Well, let me
right
ask you
now.
about that, because a word that is so overused in politics and culture, certainly the movies that are being canceled, is sacrifice. How much do people need to think about this, even with the inequities that we've covered on this very broadcast, as a time where maybe some of the stuff we got to put up with is sacrifice for our greater good and what we owe each other?
Well, I think that's a lot of it, because let's face it, most of us don't know anyone who's been infected with the coronavirus or who suffered from COVID-19, and we read the stories and we see the numbers of cases, which thankfully appear small. That's actually partly because we haven't done the testing, but and so there's I think a natural tendency to say, why am I turning my life upside down for this? And there's a very good answer. There's a very, very good answer. We've seen what happened in China. We've seen what happened in Italy. We know what can happen if we allow our medical system to get overwhelmed, and that's what we have to worry about.
Eugene, we had you on the breaking news at the top of the hour, but this is a fitting thing to reflect on. As always, we appreciate your words, not only in writing, but right here on MSNBC. Thank you, sir, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone watching The Beat tonight. We'll be back with one more thing.